I'm going to start off just going over some of the cool sort of experiences we've had as the graph. We've been around for a while. And then I'll touch on some of the really interesting new data services and the way that we're seeing data evolve in Web3. So for those of you that know the graph, this might be redundant, but the graph really is this sort of middleware layer enabling access to data in a really efficient way so developers can build applications, decentralized applications, on blockchains really easily by leveraging subgraphs. So we've been building with subgraphs for over 5 years now. They're really the standard way for developers to build applications, and we're excited to see kind of that expand and also the new kinds of data services that join subgraphs. We serve many different use cases, so really any type of application, DeFi, DAOs, governance, art, you name it. If there's data on chain, whether it's events or even state changes, we've got subgraphs and substreams that are efficient raw streaming architecture that can basically be used for any type of use case in Web3. And we support 40 chains. So really any chain that you want to build on, we've got it. And we're really here to enable that Web3 ecosystem and the competition between chains. To date, we've been fairly successful in growing our community. Anything involving technical development, indexing, the node validator role, the indexer role is really the best place for your expertise. Anything, involving sort of business, delegation, thinking more about the security of the protocol and how you can be a passive contributor. Delegator really is the role, and we've got over 10,000 delegators globally. And then if you're actually the developer yourself, or if you're really interested in the subgraph, manifest, the way it works, the way you kind of enable that interaction with the network and indexing, being a curator or subgraph developer really is for you. So we've had wide success, and we're really excited to see this be a really open source and independent ecosystem where a lot of these folks are coming together just because they're aligning with sort of the values and the product. And just to summarize what we've been able to sort of get at with the graph, our whole mantra since we started has been, we start with a hosted service, but we're always here to build a decentralized network because that's the only way that you can have truly open source and permissionless access to data in ways that participants can actually make a marketplace for data. So instead of a centralized provider, you have a network of, participants that are basically serving their data in a marketplace fashion, can be priced at whatever they're looking for. And this enables a lot of low-cost efficiency in terms of the data querying, and then also really great statistics and metrics for the performance because, again, you have indexers that are competing for your service. So indexers can compete on latency, uptime, et cetera, and even change their pricing based on that behavior. So, for example, if you're, a really DeFi-focused user, maybe you really like that real-time data, you might be more interested in paying more for your queries, and that uptime really matters for you. But maybe if you're a DAO or a governance application, maybe you care a little bit less about that. So maybe you're willing to, pay for cheaper queries for a higher latency. One of the other exceptional pieces of the network is that there's no vendor lock-in. So really what this means is anybody can become an indexer, anybody can get the data served to them by just paying for queries in GRT, and you can choose to leave that network at any point. But what's really exciting is you can still have a ton of teams that are doing support and offering that one-on-one service that you want for your API provider. So really enabling a permissionless ecosystem, but allowing you, the user, to have that accountability and decision-making about what you want to do next. Looking over just the last few months, this is reflective of Q4, so we're still looking for those Q1 results, but basically we're seeing an increase in query volume, which is basically the usage of applications themselves. The more a dApp is used, the more queries it's making. And so we actually view this as a proxy for Web3 data, not only graph usage, but it's really exciting to see that developer growth is really on trend. So since the last few quarters, I would say since about a year ago, we've seen that increase significantly, meaning that there's developers that are continuing to stay engaged with Ethereum, other blockchains that are served, Solana, Near, et cetera. L2s especially, we've seen a lot of traction. And we're seeing the subgraph deployment grow. So again, these are indicative, of graph trends for sure, but more so the trends of the general Web3 ecosystem where, again, the network is fully accessible for any type of user. So it's really easy for them to deploy a subgraph. And it's exciting to see that volume growing because that means more developers are entering the space. And the other cool area of statistics that we track is sort of the performance of our indexers themselves. So an indexer can be any node operator, any validator. Quite a few folks, I think, here operate different kinds of nodes across Web3 protocols. And so you're operating, maybe an Ethereum node, maybe a Polygon node, whichever chain you want to index, as well as a graph node. And it's really exciting to see how the competition and the evolution of indexing has occurred over the last few years. So you can see just by the query success rate that indexers are becoming more efficient. They're getting better at serving specific subgraphs and use cases. And really what this means is success for Web3, because that means that there's node operators that are really becoming experts in indexing data in a high quality way. So dApps, analysts, anyone who is looking for this data should not be expected to become an expert in indexing and DevOps, et cetera. But we're seeing the people who are experts actually really improving. So that's really exciting for Web3, especially as we enter a new cycle of usage. Going over just where we've been and where we're going, the graph started off as a hosted service. We launched network. We then were able to get a bunch of the chains that were supported on the network, on the hosted service over to the network. Finally, all the chains on the network. And the next step and sort of the final step in this permissionless evolution is anyone being able to deploy any kind of new data service. So not only subgraphs, not only supporting GraphQL, but on the network, and then being able to have access to this ecosystem of indexers and top-notch node operators to serve data. So here's where I'll kind of go into what that looks like. We're envisioning this really as a new era for the graph and Web3 data, because we're going beyond subgraphs, expanding on what subgraphs can do, and also creating many more opportunities for new use cases with Web3 data. So we really think about the future of data in terms of the kinds of data services, the developer empowerment, so the actual Web3 developers feeling like they're excited to build because the tooling of Web3 isn't bogging them down, and the graph being one of those examples. Optimizing indexer performance to meet the needs of these dApps. So again, you've got dApps that really want real-time data. You've got other dApps that have different kinds of query structures, and really making sure that the whole Web3 ecosystem feels like their data needs are supported. Building out, an interconnected graph of data. This is something new that we're looking into, which is basically how do you build a knowledge graph on top of Web3 data? So all of that fun stuff that you do, meme coins, DeFi trading, whatever it might be, can you build a knowledge graph that's really, personal or even a reflection of our ecosystem, and make actual kind of conclusions and decisions from that. And then lastly, making sure that data is really efficient in the way you can access it, that governance makes sense, and that it's resilient. Because the reason you need a network is to make sure your dApp can stay alive even if, a centralized party or provider goes down. And that's really the value proposition of the graph. So diving in a bit more into new data, because this is where a lot of the research and development has been going into. We obviously have subgraphs and GraphQL, but we're really excited about SQL being supported soon. So that's anything from data scientists and analysts being able to directly query the graph and subgraphs using SQL to development teams that want to use SQL for their analytics dApps or dashboards, et cetera, being able to basically utilize subgraphs in a different way. AI and LLMs also really exciting. I'll get into that a little bit later in the slides. Substreams and Firehose, these are other architectures that we've been working with, other products with a different kind of architecture to subgraphs, and they basically achieve the need for real-time data and streaming efficiency. And so we're working with over 15 chains that have basically integrated Firehose directly into their node architecture, including teams like Aragon and Geth, basically to make it much easier for anyone who wants to run a node and also be an indexer for data can do so much more efficiently. And then verifiable data, being a really interesting use case, especially past EIP 4844 and 444, where we're here to really save the blobs, et cetera, and making sure that data can be verifiable in a way that you aren't necessarily having to audit or double check the indexers or the stack to make sure that your data is accurate. So we've got a lot of cool things going on there and working with a cryptography team too. Diving into what these look like in practice, so really expanding to SQL is more so to be able to support different kinds of databases, data needs, and users. So we'll be starting with something called Subgraph SQL and eventually have Substream SQL and maybe even other kinds of products or interfaces. What's really exciting about this use case is that it completely opens up a new way that data scientists and analysts in the world can interact with blockchains and Web3 data. Up until now, you probably had to, directly query nodes or come up with your kind of own schema. But now you can actually have analytics applications built on top of subgraphs, which are already organized data, which makes the type of data that an analyst or a retail user much richer, basically. And we're really excited to be talking with a lot of these Web3 analytical companies. So if you are working in analytics, we'd love to chat with you as we're very close to releasing this. Substream SQL is kind of the evolution of SQL products. And this is really to enable much more real-time streaming, but also queryable via SQL. This is really exciting for a lot of the really high volume dApps or analytics platforms, teams like Misari, that really need that data because what they want to see is you as the user getting that real-time data immediately, feeling certain about the accuracy and the timeliness of data, especially in DeFi. That's really important. So we're really excited to see this use case pan out. And similarly, if you're working on analytics, please reach out to us directly. File hosting is a really interesting new data service that we saw come about less for the end user and more for node operators themselves. So with indexing specifically, there's a lot of file sharing. There's a lot of having to sync chains, resync chains, resync subgraphs. And a lot of this could be made much more efficient with sharing of files between these indexers or sharing of snapshots. So especially when you have a new chain being supported or, maybe it's a new chain for a certain indexer. Maybe that indexer just really wants to get involved in that ecosystem. There's a lot of ways that we can make that easier. So really excited to see this come to life because it's kind of a new type of data service in general. And there might even be ways for non-graph networks to even be able to use this if there's information sharing they want to see between their nodes. And then the last data service that I'll highlight that we're working on is obviously AI, very exciting. But from our perspective, we think about it as how do we utilize all the really exciting historical data, all the hard work that thousands of subgraph developers have put into Web3 and leverage that to make open source AI possible. And we see a lot of ways that indexers themselves can run GPUs for many different use cases, and also being able to train AI models off the graph data. Long term, you could see a future of fully autonomous agents, on Web3, running scripts or, making the queries themselves. And you could even have indexers potentially run agents themselves, although that is definitely much farther down the line. Diving a little deeper into what AI could look like with the graph. So this is something we're working on. We're actually releasing a white paper pretty shortly that goes over all the ways that we could see the graph and AI interacting. But taking this example, so let's say you are looking for data, and you want a chat GPT-like experience. So you are looking for trades on Uniswap, let's say. So you might then interact with an AI gateway. So this would be a gateway that's specifically supporting the AI data service. It's been specialized for the payments that might come with that versus the payments for a subgraph might be a little different. And then you've got a bunch of indexers that serve AI because they run the open source models. So we're very pro open source AI models. We're very pro figuring out what is that right incentive mechanism to ensure no doom. But in this case, you'd have indexers that are specialized for specific models. And in this example specifically, we've learned that LLMs really like SQL, and that's a really conducive language for interacting with them for efficiency. And so what you could do is ask your model to come up with a SQL query itself. And then you could have that SQL query the SQL data service also on the graph, also being indexed by SQL indexers. And then, these could actually even be the same indexers. It could be an indexer running an AI data service as well as a SQL data service, maybe even a subgraph data service. And then you have the output of that SQL data service being the actual data itself. So in this example, it's really cool to see that you can actually leverage LLMs to support other data services and make them much more efficient than just manual language. But it also opens up a whole world of okay, we can actually build the ChatGPTs and all these things on Web3. What is the right use case here? And because we have, decades at this point of crypto data, perhaps not decades in Ethereum, but over a decade in Bitcoin, there's a lot of really cool trends, analysis, inference that can really be resolved from this. So we're excited to continue exploring and figuring out what is the right use case and what's the right way people want to consume data from AI and models. Another really exciting area of our expansion is evolving the protocol itself. So the graph was deployed on Ethereum. We've migrated to Arbitrum. And now we're looking at how do we actually make the protocol better. And better means more permissionless, so meaning anyone can deploy their own data service. So it doesn't have to be one of the ones I mentioned. Those just happen to be the ones that we're focusing on most right now. But imagine you've got your own idea, you want to create a market, and there's indexers that want to serve that data. You should be able to deploy that and really get access to that marketplace on both sides of dApps that want data and also indexers that want to serve the data. And then also we're looking into slashability, and what does that mean for delegators and indexers? Does that increase the security of the protocol and really engagement in sort of the way that a permissionless data service model could work? We're also looking more into decentralized arbitration. So especially as you have over 40 chains, every chain kind of has its own finicky things going on. Some of the arbitration can be very different per chain. And then lastly, we're looking into just wider governance and basically minimizing governance in certain areas, but then also expanding the ability for the community to get involved in governance in other areas. And the last area that I'll highlight just around the graph's roadmap and kind of where we're going in this new era is interconnected graph of data. So like I said, this is the thinking around, a semantic web basically built on the graph, sort of the original vision of a semantic web where you could really tie all data and information and knowledge together. And we now have the tools for that coordination in Ethereum and Web3 with the graph. And so we're really looking into what does that mean and what do consumers want, what's the role that the graph plays. And one example is definitely natural language queries, leveraging something like the AI data service I just went over, but also looking into other data sort of interfaces. And one of our founders, Yaniv Tal, he'll be launching GeoGenesis pretty soon. And the goal of GeoGenesis is basically to enable real world data, so people data, just regular users, being able to get that data on chain and get meaningful information or knowledge back. And so really thinking about how do we go beyond Web3 data being just the events and call data and state data that's on chain and more, evolutionary to the real world and what's happening and what information do we actually think needs to be brought on chain. Awesome. And if you are interested in getting to know more about subgraphs, you can visit thegraph.com. This is where you'll see the way to actually delegate and stake your GRT. You can become an indexer, and you can also deploy a subgraph, use a subgraph, use a substream, deploy a substream, learn more about Firehose and all the exciting data services. Lastly, I will just go over, we've got, I think this is actually wrong. We've got over 7 teams at this point that are full-time dedicated to the graph, and it really goes to show that decentralization is possible. Awesome. Thank you so much.